Even though no one really talks about Australia much outside of Australia, this has made global news headlines. The High Court, as in the highest court you can go to here in Australia, has basically said that what our former Premier, or kind of the President of the state of Victoria, did was illegal, and it has been reversed. He said it was the judge said it was the world's worst EV policy, and it was actually illegal. Now, we have a few Tesla fans to thank for this. A couple of Tesla fans actually took the government to court, and they won. This is an incredible story. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. Great to see you. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching the Electric Viking. The Australian High Court has reversed a tax on EVs. The problem is, right, that this is really good news, but a lot of people have already had their licenses revoked by the government of Victoria. In fact, hundreds have, because they didn't comply exactly correctly with the standards. They had to basically fill out a logbook. You have to write in this logbook every single time you go for a drive, what the kilometers you do are, where you went to, essentially to try and prove, that you did a certain number of kilometers, where they were driven. So if they were driven to Victoria, you have to pay a tax to Victorian government. Now, if you drove those kilometers outside of Victoria, it's the second most popular state in Australia, but it's only a very small state. It's one of the smallest states in Australia. Now, if you drove your car outside of Victoria, the Victorian government said, too bad. We're going to tax you for driving it outside of Victoria. So you've got to pay us taxes for using your car in a state we don't own. But it'd be like let's say you bought an electric car in California, and the California government says, when you drive your car in New York, I mean, you're miles away from New York, but when you do that, right, if you drive your car in Philadelphia, if you drive it in Miami, we are charging you a tax on every single kilometer you drive. You have to pay us. If you don't pay us on time and in the correct way, we're going to revoke your license. And that's exactly what they did. They went and revoked hundreds of people's licenses. And the thing is, they, in fact, in many instances, made a mistake. In fact, they got it wrong with a lot of these people who did the right thing. The government made a mistake because of their bizarre policies that they didn't implement properly. And now the court has also said that the government has to reimburse these people and give them their licenses back. It's incredible. Anyway, right before this decision was made, the Premier, as in the President of our state, I don't know what you guys call it in the United States, but the leader of our state, or in the UK, anyway, the leader, he stepped down. And there's been a series of scandals. He was involved in getting these secret loans from China, where the Chinese government comes in and builds all these roads for you, and it looks like you're doing really well, but actually you owe the Chinese government all this money, and then they have political influence in your state. That's exactly what he did. And there was a lot of kickback about this. Politics were saying, politicians were saying this was bad, he should have done this. Anyway, he got re-voted back in, which was shocking to me. I'm not sure why that happened. And he's just resigned right before this ruling has been reviewed. I'm going to guess he probably had an idea what would happen, that this would have a really bad media all around the world, and then people would be saying Daniel Andrews, who the person was responsible for making this decision, they'll be saying, this was crazy, why'd you do this? But for him, he just quit before that could happen. Anyway, in 2021, the Victorian state government proposed a tax on EVs with a rationale that it needed to make up for lost road revenue. This is a common fossil fuel industry talking point. Basically, they say electric cars don't pay taxes when you pay for gasoline or petrol. The average person will pay the government a tax on the petrol that they use or the gasoline they use. So you're not paying that tax when you pay for your fuel because you're not paying for fuel. So then the government says, well, you're using the roads unfairly, so you need to pay a tax for using the roads. The proposal was met with opposition from businesses across the automotive industry, from green industry, from healthcare services. Basically, healthcare is saying, hang on a minute, pollution is causing billions of dollars of health diseases. So it doesn't make sense, because everyone was driving electric cars. We could significantly reduce cancers, significantly reduce many of the illnesses we're seeing in hospitals as a result of the emissions coming from cars. So actually, it doesn't make sense to tax EVs, because we'll save huge amounts of money if everyone converts to EVs faster. That's the reality there. I don't think you can argue with that fact, because that's true. The World Health Organization, in fact, even makes the same statement. Anyway, the state went forward with the rules, with this policy. It rushed it in. And the reason it rushed it in is because it was bordering on bankruptcy. Now, I don't know about you guys. I've heard about California having some issues with funding and all that kind of thing. They have to be maybe slightly bailed out and get loans and stuff. Well, Victoria was in the same position. The government spent way too much money, closed down the entire state through COVID for the longest lockdown in the history of the world. And in fact, locked down the state for, I believe, 1 year. So legally, you couldn't really do anything for nearly a year. It was amazing. Anyway, Victoria's tax was 2.5 cents per kilometre. So for every single kilometre you drove, you had to pay the government 2.5 cents. This required EV owners to keep records of every single kilometre they drove for 5 years. Now, this was a burden not required by people who drive internal combustion engine vehicles. And it's a significant reason why EV adoption was much slower in Victoria than other states. Now, Victoria is seen as this progressive state that supports EVs. And there's a lot of people in Victoria who want to buy EVs. In fact, really Victoria is a lot more progressive in a lot of ways than the rest of Australia. But EV adoption has been slower than the rest of Australia. Clearly, this was influencing people. People were saying, this is a pain in the ass. I don't want to have to do this. So therefore, they weren't buying electric cars. I believe the federal court, the high court has gone, you guys are idiots. This is just plain stupid. It's clearly affecting people's decision making. It's unfairly impacting them by having to write down all this stuff, having to keep these journals, these logbooks, when people who buy a polluting gasoline or diesel powered car don't have to do it. Really insane. Anyway, what was also surprising is if you work out the numbers, this meant that it costs around $330 in taxes per year, right, just to drive your EV. However, here's something that I've read from someone who commented on this issue. California, they said, basically does the same thing as what Victoria tried to do, well, what Victoria did until it's been repealed by the court. However, they do this for gasoline-powered vehicles at $1 per gallon of gas taxes and fees. It equals 3 cents per mile. In fact, it's not 3 cents. It's actually 0.3 cents per mile, assuming a 33 mile per gallon vehicle. California has it worse though because the tax applies to most of the population. $1 equals $1.57 AU. Of course, the US dollar is worth more than the Australian dollar. That equals 1.6 kilometers per mile. In the end, this means California's gas tax actually translates to 7.5 Australian cents per kilometre, or 3 times the Victorian EV tax. The thing is though, the high taxes weren't the issue. It was that the Victorian government was double dipping taxpayers with taxes when road maintenance is the responsibility of the federal government. So basically like the responsibility of, say, the Biden administration. It was the same in Australia. However, taxpayers were paying tax to the federal government and the state government. Ironically, taxpayers in California also have to pay a gas tax to the federal government in addition to the 18 cents per gallon that they pay. However, this commenter says that it's just that road maintenance is designated as the primary responsibility of US states instead. So in the US, you guys, the road maintenance is generally covered by the state itself. But in Victoria, it's partly covered by the state and it's partly covered by the federal government. So like the Biden administration, for example, just to give you an analogy. In Australia, gasoline taxes or petrol taxes are collected by the federal government, not by state governments. So Victoria does not collect any tax on gasoline or petrol, and therefore one cannot say that the implementation of an EV tax had anything to do with mandating equal treatment. It was simply about the government trying to find money because it was running out of money fast. Now, the EV owners, in fact, I believe 2 Tesla owners made this argument in court. They said that the Victorian government is not allowed to impose an excise or tax on EVs, as that is the responsibility only of the Australian federal government, not of local governments. So they imposed this tax illegally. I believe the Victorian government knew they were going to lose this case, and they just hoped that it wouldn't go through to the High Court, but it did. The Australian Federal Attorney General and the Australian Trucking Association agreed with the EV owners, while other Australian state attorneys sided with Victoria because obviously other Australian states want to eventually impose the same taxes so they can make money out of it as well. Now they will be discouraged from doing so though after seeing Victoria lose. The Australian High Court agreed with the EV owners and they have now cancelled the world's worst EV tax, or that's what many people have called it anyway because it was illegal. The ruling will stop other Australian states, I believe, from imposing these kinds of taxes. Now, I personally don't have an issue with some kind of tax for using the road in future. But when you're at that point where only a small percentage of cars in a country like Australia are being sold as EVs, we want to encourage more adoption, more car adoption. And when you consider the fact that pollution from cars makes up such a huge impact on the health of our populace, it's really important we move to EVs as quickly as possible rather than discouraging people buying them. You can clearly see from the statistics that Victorians in general were discouraged because of these rules from buying EVs, and that's why they bought less of them than other states where there are more people. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on all this in the comments. Thank you for watching.